Hey, what's up, guys? It's your boy Days, and you're about to watch Thorin rant for about 3 hours.
Right, this is going to be another one of my Patreon discussion shows. It's another just one versus one, or one compliment one approach. Don't know much is supposed to be competitive in that sense. So okay, this is Wendelful. I don't think you've ever been on one of these ones before, right?
No, I think this is my first. My life is kind of busy, and yours is busier, and
Yes.
that's what happened.
Actually, that's the funny thing. I opened the last one, sort of half jokingly explained to Jerky's Mini, who's obviously been on like most of them, that that what's ridiculous is, even though obviously it's like the main perk of being the donator of $100 is you can come on this show in theory. People would be amazed how many of the people I've sent the message to either never reply to the message ever, but keep paying the $100, or reply and just say like, I'm busy, don't worry about it. And in fact, I think that's the part I forgot to mention, is what you just said there, is I've noticed actually a lot of the people who seem to support the Patreons for like buy the numbers, for this, for mainly like esports stuff. First of all, it's people who have a real job, therefore they actually have money, and they're not like kids who are like, I won't pay for anything. And then secondly, because they have a real job, like you're saying, they're busy. So they just think, nah, it's like I've noticed for most people, they sort of use the content as a way to like, if you're bored at work or you're traveling or something, you just chuck that on, it's something to do in the background.
Yeah, and, I mean, for me, I can listen to it while I'm doing other things. But as far as being locked onto a computer screen for an hour or two, that's a tough go.
I get it though, mate, because you have to realize, like, I actually noticed the same thing. I used to be someone when I had a lot more free time outside of like my work. I used to be someone who used to love listening to podcasts. But then I used to listen to them on my computer, right? Because I would listen while I was doing something else or playing it. And then when I got more and more and more work, it's hard to justify watching something for 2 hours. So what I did was, since in my line of work you have to travel a lot, I just obviously like put them all on like MP3 players and stuff. And then I found I just listened to like 10 times as many, because then when you're traveling or doing something boring, it's the ideal time to have something you can focus on in the background and really let the thoughts ruminate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, honestly, I haven't even been able to keep up with some of your more prolific segments like Listen Loco.
There's too much stuff, mate. Don't worry about that. I have to realize there's way too much content. Like, I always tell people, like, even I don't watch my own content. There wouldn't be time in the fucking day, would there? I have to do the other content. I have to just once it's gone, I've just got to trust it was good and let it go out the door. And yeah, obviously, that's the other thing people don't realize about talk shows. One of the reasons why it's like that old joke that like half of success is just turning up. That's like the famous idiom in American culture. It's kind of like that for podcasts, mate, because I tell you what, there's a lot of people out there think they could do a wicked podcast. Maybe they even could. And I've seen some started, but just keeping doing it is the hard part. Because the problem is what you do is incredibly disposable. Like, think of the ones I do with Listen Local when we're doing like basically a review of the last week's LCS games. Well, sometimes if Local releases that like a day before the LCS next games and I forget to tweet it, I sometimes think if 2 days later, there's not even any point tweeting it now, because if anyone watches it, they just, all the latest games will just invalidate half the shit we're talking about. Like, no one's ever going to listen to this episode ever again. It basically had a life of like 2 days. That's all it had.
Yeah, and that's where even that, or with counterpoints, when you have someone like Stewie, those are actually kind of those high level ones.
Yeah, those ones
really
have a little
resonate.
bit more, right? You could you're right. You could go back and listen to that one. I think in 6 months it'd have something interesting in, because it's not just people just waffling about what they think about a best of one, like in League of Legends. That's the other thing about League of Legends. Like, even this is what's funny, right? The fact that people dare to tell me that I'm the one who's too hyperbolic. It's like, if we all wanted to be very serious, right, and like aliens were going to watch this and decide the fate of humanity, I could be totally as calm as possible describing what happened in the game. It's all the fans who go mental over best of ones. They're the ones who just like, they do a 180 completely, like a second before that team's going to win everything. Then they just trash, and then, they're never going to accomplish anything. Right, let me ask you a question at the top then. Since there's just the two of us on this one, what are the main games you follow? Like, what's your main esports bag?
CSGO would be number one. And honestly, right now, Starcraft 2 is just usurped League by far.
Oh, okay. When did you get into that?
Well, I've watched Starcraft 2 kind of as long as League has been around, and Starcraft 1 before that. But
so was that before CS for you then?
Yeah, actually, CS, you're what introduced me to CS.
Right.
It was you were talking about this kid on Liquid named Simple that was filling in, and
turned out pretty good, didn't he? I wasn't really overhyping him, was that, CS fans? He was only the best fucking player to ever play any game ever, as far as I can tell. Like, pretty good, didn't he?
And you know what? You mentioned, even on your last show with Jerkies, I think, you said, oh, you know, in 2016 when he was on Liquid, or he was okay, but he wasn't the best in the world. I don't know, man. When I was watching him even then...
Oh, he had flashes, don't worry about that, mate. Yeah.
It was like... Yeah, he wasn't what he is now. But as far as the things he did at times, it was so beyond everyone else. And so basically, and I tend to do this with games, is I lock onto a guy who just asserts dominance in a special way. And so I just follow that person. And so I guess I'm a Navi fan. But I'm actually...
For now, at least. For now. We'll see. You know, maybe in 2 years you're a FaZe fan as a result. We'll see.
Yeah, who knows? And I like Liquid. I'm Canadian, so you know, they've got the two best Canadians.
Sure.
So at this point, I got to like them. But yeah, it's funny what you mentioned about short-term memory. My favorite example in sports right now is people that undervalue LeBron James.
Sure.
Regardless of where you think he is all time, he's obviously the player of this era. And I mean, just because he got hurt and the Lakers went from a 4th seed to out of the playoffs, people are going, oh, he's maybe the 6th best player in the world. I'm like, you don't get to take the throne until the guy actually gets off the throne.
Sure. Well, the funny thing is, as well, it especially doesn't make any sense in the current context, because, like, here's the thing. If Kevin Durant hadn't gotten injured and he'd won the title this year, they could have started making a pretty good case for him, you know? But the problem is, actually, this playoffs has probably ended that debate, because sadly, with the type of injury he has, you don't really ever come back at full strength. And obviously, you know, he hasn't done as much as someone like LeBron has. He was the main contender for me in this generation, you know? Like, the problem people don't realize with the others is, like, they all have the talent, they all pass the eye test, but it's like this, just compared to Counter-Strike, mate. The good thing about games like Counter-Strike, and the reason why people can get into it, to tie into what you were saying, because I've actually had a lot of people say it went that way. It's like, if they follow League and CS, or they follow Overwatch and CS, or they follow Quake and CS in the past, what got them into CS was exactly that. Like, they knew my stuff in another game. They saw a video, because often, to be fair, I kind of cross-pollinate, you know, I'll use a reference from another game, like you're saying. And the thing is, if you notice, I have a very similar mentality. Basically, I follow players, not teams. I even follow players, not games, to some degree. That's why I always used to tell people, you can't ever take it for granted when, like, a really legendary player retires. Because when that player retires, one day, you know, there'll be another player who'll come along, will be legendary, and hopefully more. But in that moment, there isn't a player who's at that status. You can't, like, just boost someone up to that. So in the same, I'll tie it in the same sense as, like, it is depressing that, like, Kevin Durant's injured and might never come back. These players are all getting older. The problem is we haven't quite yet got the next generation through yet. No, the funny thing is, when you mentioned that about Simple, this is one of the things that's hilarious is people think I just make loads of predictions, right? But I actually don't. Usually, if you notice, my style of predicting is the opposite. I tend to be the guy who's, like, skeptical of people. Like, for example, Ents. I think I was actually justified by saying, like, let's not go too crazy. Like, they did in the end prove most of what people wanted. But, you know, people were kind of, like, giving them the throne way too early after, like, that just one run, basically. So normally, I'm, like, the skeptical guy. So if I ever tell you this person's fucking unreal and I think they're not the best player yet, that's the one to watch out for. Because, I mean, I actually didn't notice this myself. It was my mate Yisko, who I do my Overwatch podcast with, who just pointed it out at the end of last year. He goes, oh, you must be loving this year. And I go, what do you mean? Because of Astralis being good in that? And he goes, no, because, like, think about it. Look what they've just voted the top 3 players at the end of the year. And I looked and it was like Simple, Device, Nico. And I was like, yeah, I did, you know, I was sort of, I had the you know, the early ticket on some of those ones. I got on the train pretty early. The rest of y'all, you know, were joining later, but it's all right. It's all right. It's all right.
Yeah, no kidding. And, you know, you mentioned, like, kind of will another player come along. What's really fantastic right now about CS is we not only have Simple, just, I mean, that heroic series where they didn't get into the EPL playoffs.
He was going bonkers in that as well.
I know you mentioned, like, oh, there's an argument for Ziwu. I've never seen Ziwu hit that level. Well, no one's hit that level. It's
Sure.
so simple. And that was for me where I just thought, oh, of course they dropped Edward, because
Yes.
it was on Overpass where they kept hitting the B site because Simple was on A on CT, and they just washed over everyone else on Navi over and over again, and Simple still won like 6 rounds, coming across and getting triples and doubles and just cleaning up. And you're not supposed to be able to do that with an op, and you're not supposed to be able to do that with any gun or any positioning. And I was pretty frustrated. I didn't even know if I could keep watching Navi after that series because I was so angry.
Oh no! What's funny is you've got the same problem I have, mate. Which is like, this is why it's a different mentality to watch games. Actually, I think, to be fair, it's actually the style that my work encourages. Which is like to enjoy the greatness of the player, win or lose. Because the problem is, I always had the same thing happen. Whenever people knew I really liked a player, they would always think that meant I was a fan of the team. And my joke was always like, unless that's the best team, bullshit. I'm the biggest hater of that fucking team, because that's the team that to me are like the prison wardens around the guy I want to succeed. Like, think of all the years, to be fair, until Nico was in FaZe Clan, it was the same thing. You used to look at that Mouse Sports team and be like, fuck these guys, this is just telling me so much that they're so bad and he's so good, especially because there's a type of fan that's going to think, well, if they lost the game, they must have been bad in the game. No, the thing is, on what you said there, that's what you got to notice, mate. Always whenever I make like a statement like that, like a serious statement about a player, always look at my wording, right? Because I've never said Ziwu is the best player. I always say what you said. Yeah. I say you can make an argument for it. So what am I saying there basically is, translation, I don't think he's the best player. But if someone else wants to make the case, I think we're approaching the point where it's reasonable now. Like, they could make an argument like, he was at more tournaments recently, or, in his team. I actually think a good angle, if you want to give some props to him, is he doesn't have an electronic in his team. He's actually more like where Simple was earlier in his career. Right. But I agree with you. The difference is this. Right now, when Ziwu goes off, which is, yes, very, very often, that's what's the obvious biggest comparison point, Yeah, I would say at times he looks close. The difference is, though, it's almost like it is almost like mundane for Simple to just go God mode in every series. So it's not even that like with Ziwu, it's like, wow, he did it again. With Simple, it's like, is it ever going to stop? Is it just going to be like this forever then? Because that's the other thing I always told people as well, is if you ever watch the great players in Counter-Strike, one of the cool things is, compared to other games, they can have maybe they have 3 months where they're really good. Some of them might have even 6 months where they're the best player. But to be as good as Simple has been for the last year and a half, it's just impossible. I don't know how it keeps going. It should end. It actually should end like tomorrow and just be a very good player instead of the absolute best,
Yeah, and the thing is, the only time I see him have bad numbers is when he is, like I said, on CT side, solo on a site like B side Dust 2. And the other team just decides, we would rather go into 4 players time and again and see what happens than go 5-on-1 against Simple on that. And then he doesn't get that many frags because they refuse to go anywhere near him. So that's like the only way to shut him down is to just avoid him entirely on the map. It's disgusting.
If you're Canadian, are you a fan of hockey?
Not as much anymore. Yeah, but
okay, because I have an analogy I'd draw to that actually, which is, that's one of the reasons why I love it when players go into like a streak like Simple's on, or Kenny S back in the day and stuff. It's because I always tell people this. When I used to follow Quake, because Quake was such like a high skill game, actually it meant that if you were a really good player, you had all these opportunities to show you were good, right? So as a result, you could watch the best player, and there was people might not know this, but nowadays, yes, Quake's only 1 versus 1 in the esports side, but way back in the day, you used to be able to watch a team version where it was 4 versus 4 team deathmatch, and if you would watch that, because Quake's so high level a game, the best player would be like Simple, basically. Every game he would be the best, and he would be like doing amazingly, kind of like basketball, like the best player really can just take over every game. But I always used to tell people, the reason why it's so insane when people go on these streaks in CS is it's more like hockey. Like in hockey, obviously, you can play an amazing game and the puck just doesn't go in. You don't score that game and you lose. Yeah. So like, that's why if you ever see like a truly dominant hockey player, it's like, holy fuck, this guy's just unreal how good they are. Like, if the guys who can just score, like, the people who just average like a point and a half a game, and so it's unreal, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, the reason I don't watch hockey is because at some point I don't have time. I like football and basketball more, but when you watch, especially some of the guys in the playoffs, like some of the runs that Crosby's gone on.
Sure.
Oh, actually, it's a good point. Ovechkin in the playoffs, where the team every year for year after year until he finally got his, would just fall apart around him.
It was tortured, wasn't it? It looked like he was cursed, mate.
I honestly, I don't like the Capitals at all. I have no care for them as a team whatsoever. But I thought to myself when they won, I mean, this guy deserved,
absolutely,
in his legacy to have a victory, because he would put up a goal a game in the playoffs and just get banged out in the second round. It was disgusting.
It is interesting, though, how that works, because that's one of the I actually do think in sports, it's the same with esports, that is one of the mysteries, is what do you do when you have a team where the pieces obviously could win? Like, as you say, mate, the amount of times the Capitals won the fucking President's Cup and then just went out in the second round is like unbelievable. If anyone isn't a fan of hockey, by the way, that means basically they were literally the team that won the most points in the regular season. Yeah. And then they not win the cup. They wouldn't even make the final. Like, they were always just getting wrecked by someone who was an underdog. So the idea that what that basically tells you there is it's like Team Liquid last year, like a more extreme version. Because I always used to tell people, if you can win as many times against all the other best teams as Team Liquid can last year, in theory, you are supposed to even just accidentally finally win one and win a big title against Astralis. Like, it's so unlikely that you'd never do it and that you get all these chances and fail. So, yeah, same thing. Like, if you looked at that guy's career, mate, I tell you what, I actually thought it was too late. Like, I thought a couple of years ago he'd blown his last chance,
Yeah, so you know what? I'm just so enthusiastically happy for him because, like, the thing is, it should be a fair debate between him and Crosby.
Of course.
Who's better? But Crosby kept winning and Ovechkin kept getting dumped in the playoffs, and it's just not fair to him. So I'm pretty pleased. That actually leads me, you mentioned kind of how they kept losing like Liquid did. The most underrated aspect of the whole Blastralis meme is that Liquid genuinely had no mental game in the finals last year. They genuinely, they couldn't beat Astralis. They just fell apart. And then they couldn't beat other teams. And then all of a sudden, Astralis takes 3 months off, and eventually a team of that caliber is going to win.
Absolutely, yeah.
You can't, especially when you, as the other great team, aren't around. And man, Astralis missed a beat by letting these younger guys realize that they were actually the best in the world.
Oh, the sad thing is, mate, I'm not even exaggerating. Like, the Astralis guys, it still hasn't fully hit for them. Like, because you have to realize, even though people won't know this, a lot of the stupid shit the fans were saying actually mirrors basically what a lot of the pros, including Astralis, thought. Like, I'm not exaggerating. If you went back, so obviously, like this month, famously, there was 3 whole tournaments this month because you had Cologne, and then you had Blast LA, and then you had IM Chicago, right? So I will say, if you go back even a month ago and you take 3 titles off Liquid, they were still very, very, very good, and they obviously clearly were dominating the period, but it wasn't as ridiculous as it looks now. Like, the stats now have gone completely out of control because they just never bloody lose a map now even. So, but if you go back about a month or so ago, 2 months, let's say, to when Astralis was just coming back to the circuit, like they played ECS, mate, all the things the fans were saying, loads of the pros thought as well, including Astralis, that they all thought like, well, sure, they had a few months off, and Liquid's won a few tournaments, but right, Astralis will just win all the tournaments in the summer. And then when they didn't win ECS, they were like, that's all right, they're warming up, they're going to hit peak form around maybe EPL, Cologne. Didn't even, obviously get to the final EPL. Then they were like, it's all right. And scrims, they're fucking killing it now. And so basically, the point is, I go the other way on that one. Like, forget whatever Astralis was doing. Like, I genuinely think this, and this might sound sacrilegious, but I would have fucking loved to see this Team Liquid now against the real Astralis. Because I don't think it's as easy that Astralis would have won like everyone else does. And, it's just because they did badly. For me, I agree with you. It's more like what Astralis' absence allowed Liquid all these chances where they were a heavy favourite to just be like, oh, so this is how you win like a champion. This is how you close a game out. This is how you beat someone who you're supposed to beat. And then after that, Astralis came back as one of those lesser teams, and Team Liquid was like, oh, I'll just crush you as well. Cool. See ya. Yeah. You just beat everyone now. You've literally allowed us to get a little taste of victory in that sense.
And you saw how in the final against ENCE, where the first 2 games never even started. The thing is that it's not that ENCE didn't actually set up a lot of rounds to win, but every single guy on Liquid just thought 2v4, yeah, whatever. 1v2, 1v3, I can win these things. And you just saw them getting doubles and triples all over the place, just stomping on these lesser fraggers in ENCE. And that's what you get, is just kind of a pretty boring first 2 maps and a pretty boring overall final because, well, I say boring, I enjoyed it. Boring in the sense
for the spectacle of how ridiculous it was fun, yeah. But put it this way, as an actual like match to enjoy competition, yeah, it was terrible in that sense, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. So there's kind of that fascination, but it's more the slasher flick fascination, which is, oh, that's gruesome.
Sure.
and that's where you didn't see that.
Oh, of course not.
Last year, the moment they got down a couple frags in a round, their mental game in the finals fell apart. Any kind of bad situation that occurred to them within the game or the round, they just kind of couldn't handle it. And I think Astralis just opened the door for a beast that may just walk.
I have no idea if anyone can stop this team right now, especially at the level they're at. That's the other thing as well. I'll tell you something from my long experience watching Counter-Strike. This is one of the reasons why, unfortunately, most teams who are like the team and have a dominant era, like this will sound harsh, but I actually think like the lesser players in those teams end up getting overrated, unfortunately. And one of the reasons why is because I'll tell you a hallmark. Because, right, I've made this point a few years ago. People always miss it, right? Most people, when they break down Counter-Strike, so if you're a really casual fan, really all you can see is the skill. You just see the crosshair, and you see kills, and your brain just evaluates, was it a good kill? Was it spectacular? And that's all you can go off because you haven't learned the game yet. Then the perception is that the highest level of the game is the tactical side. It's like, oh, what, you know, where were you positioning the people? That's definitely a big part of it. You have to learn that as well. But the part that always goes missing, because unfortunately it's kind of invisible, is, I mean, a loose way to call it would be the team player, but I always use the term dynamics, because if you've ever watched hockey or basketball or stuff, it's not even literally about the X's and the O's or what the player did. It's about concepts like how do they play with each other? Like, what was the concept of, you know, what space on the floor are you going to fill, or what line are you going to use in hockey to attack the defense with now, so that they have to swap out to the other line, and then you put your next one in, you know, like that sort of thing. So since that goes a little bit missing, well, that's what, for me, makes you the best team usually. Like, it's very rare that you have the best team play and you're not the best team in the world. If you look, it's nearly always the hallmark. So if you look at the best teams that are like the truly great teams, what you find is what you're describing. Because they already have like the skill to be the best, they've got a great team play, like they're already the championship team. It means that even the worst player, when he's in like a unwinnable scenario, it's almost like, we're going to win the game anyway, so fuck it. Maybe I can even win this scenario. Right, and it's like you just get this, like, forget even the term confidence. You just get like a freedom to play in that scenario that is unbelievable. That's why if you go and you look at the Astralis teams, or the best example ever for me probably, is if you go back a few years when SK Gaming, the Brazilians, were on top. Right. Mate, when they were on top, like, if you ever go and look at Taco's stats, it doesn't matter, even at their best period, his stats aren't very good. But even when his stats looked shit, and like the number at the end of the game was shit, the amount of times he'd win like a 1v1 against some fucking amazing player, and you'd be like, what? He's no way he's at that level. But the point is, in his team, like, Fallen was going to get a load of AWP kills, coldzera was dropping 35 anyway, Fur was opening him up on the entry side, and then to him, it was just like, fuck it, even I might win a few of these. So at that point, once you get that level of like literal belief that you're going to win the game, that's very, very hard to turn around. I mean, Astralis should know themselves, because I don't think if they realise this, that's something that's like a benefit they had, is when you're the unbeatable team, it has two knock-on effects. You believe that, and then even worse, the opponent starts believing it, doesn't he? The opponent starts thinking, oh, how am I ever going to win this game? Or if I get down in a game, it's over, isn't it? They're going to close me out.
Yeah, and even in that 16-14 to end against ENCE, that never happens. Maybe even 3 months ago for Liquid, where they kind of fall apart, they give room for the other team to catch up.
They could have even lost the map in regulation,
yeah. And then in the final rounds, they actually bring it back together and say, well, no, we can just win this now. That's not that mental strength. I was impressed even then. I went, oh, yeah, these guys are playing in a different stratosphere mentally than they were before, because they didn't fall apart like I watched 16 different times in 2018. It was unbelievable.
That's also another weird angle as well that people might miss as well. So I'll give you like another analogy. Is one of the sports I love to watch is tennis. And the thing that about tennis that's a bit weird though is like the scoring system in tennis, if people don't know, is kind of like a bit deceptive because basically there's even been studies done on this. Like the actual amount of points that like, you know, the number one guy wins over the number two isn't that much to win a match. But the scoring system basically makes it always look close from the way it works.
Right. Yeah.
Well, the problem as a result is it's easy as a fan to lie to yourself. So what happens is if your favourite player, like in the first set, he just lost it close, but you know what? He was so close, he could have won it. And then the second one, he wins, but narrowly. And then, you know, like basically you can lie to yourself the whole way. Like, he almost could have done it. It's like, no, but actually the fact that like when he's in those close situations, he always tends to just lose it. That is what will stop him being number one. Because the difference is you can do that every now and then. But if you notice the championship teams, if you give them the opportunity to win the game, they just close the game there. Like, they don't dick around. They're not going to... Like, in that scenario there, like you're saying, a lesser team, would have been overtime. You know, if you'd have got 15... Or it would be... You could even have literally lost that 16-14 in regulation yourself. So the difference is... You know what? You probably very likely still win map 4. And let's face it, to even get to map 5 would have took a lot from ENCE. But if you even open that door, let's say 5% of the time they do it. 5% of the time they get to map 5. And then once it's at map 5... God only knows at that point in time, mate. You know, suddenly that big advantage you had's gone completely.
Yeah. And that's where, and honestly, even just with Liquid, one thing that a lot of great teams historically haven't had is the fact that Elige right now is a monster. But say he cools off 5%, well, there's Twists and NAF can warm up 2.5% each.
Sure.
And then they're the same team. It's unbelievable because it's not as if Elige since 2018 has been the best player or clearly the best player. Right now, he's just obviously dominant. But Twists, you know, in his role is almost as good. It's not as high KD, but just the way that he just bangs into sights.
Oh, the eye test tells you that guy's a fucking monster, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. So, and as a Canadian, you know, I like what he's doing. But it's unreal to think that they could actually have their best player go through that kind of 3-month rise and fall, and then they'll just be good because the next guy manages to increase his ability just a tiny bit. And this could just be a disgusting era for them. I mean, it's already an era, but to think of historically what it could be.
Yes. With
all the lineup and the talent. And honestly, with Nitro being fantastic at IGLing, I'm kind of surprised at how... I don't know. He's doing really well. So I don't...
Sure.
He's really grown because you think of how he just sort of did it at first for a while and dabbled in it and then committed to it, but they weren't getting over the hump. Man, he's really turned himself into kind of, Glaive 2.0 there, which has been really fun to watch.
That's why I did a video it was this week, actually, where I was kind of saying that, like, even though no one would think this is a Team Liquid fan, you got to give mad props to Zeus for what he did last year. Because my point is, like, and I think this especially works with Nitro, is it's not really as mysterious when you consider the sheer number of people he's been and worked with over the years. Like, if you work with all these guys, and the key thing is he stuck with it, like you said, he didn't just quit completely, you know. Eventually he decided, like, I'm doing this for good. And at that point in time, he'd worked with all these different coaches. He'd even obviously been under different in-game leaders himself. The real problem with the in-game leader role is I don't believe you have to actually be a genius. Like, I think if you are one of those people, like a God B, great. Like, that's just like, that's like miraculous that those people exist. But I do think you can be a very good in-game leader without like being sort of born with it like they seem to be. But the problem is it's commitment. You've got to literally decide, like, this is all I'm going to do. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to get to a level that I'm good at. And even when it's hard and, you know, it's not working with this current team, I haven't figured out what to do with this play, I'm going to stick with it no matter what. I'm going to keep going. And the problem is, like, you can imagine if you do it for 3 months and it's hard, or you do it 6 months and you run into a big problem, it's too tempting to just say, I'll keep my job and get someone else in to do this, you know. Like, why do I want to put all the pressure on myself? So the fact he's stuck with it is the most amazing part because, listen, I can even tell you from knowing internally, there was times internally where they actually specifically wanted him to stop being in-game leader because they wanted to make him like a fragger again. Like, they wanted to bring someone else in so that then they could turn Nitro loose. And in fact... I won't give too much info here, but put it this way. It's some of the bigger names who are in the team who might not be right now. Put it that way. There's people who've been at times where that's also one of the miracles about this team, by the way. Is behind the scenes, this team shouldn't have existed about 5 times over. Like, someone was going to get kicked or someone was going to leave. Or in fact, there's one area where I might even do a piece of content on this, but it might be hard to get the people to talk about it. But if I can get anything, it'd be gold. Because all I need to tell you is this. So when you hear about how Cloud9's team fell apart, it's basically, unfortunately, a big element of it is that the owner, Jack from Cloud9, is sort of too nice a guy. And so because he has like a really close relationship with a bunch of the players, if they come to him and they give him like the best ever speeches to like, I love Cloud9, but unfortunately, like I've got an offer from this other team that's even better than Cloud9. So like, listen, Jack, like I love your team, but can I please go? Like, it's important. Unfortunately, he's like a big softie. At the end, he'll be like, all right, I'll facilitate the trade, Whereas all I can tell you is this. In Team Liquid, there have been cases where the player even told me, like, forget wanting to go, I'm gone. I'm going to join this team. And then about a month later, I'm like, what's going on? And he goes, I'm not allowed to leave. Actually, like, they said that my contract's like 2 years and the buyout's like X million or something,
Oh, yeah.
And so what they don't realize, this is something I think a lot of teams are going to have to learn in esports is, I get it. If the player made a really good case, like, listen, I literally, like, my own game's shit here. I'm not playing well enough, and I need to go to this other team. I'd maybe listen to that. But when the player's like, I'm a really good player. I'm even good for your team, but I just want to go at my own whim and play with this other guy. If you're the team owner, eventually you have to say, this is like a sport, motherfucker. I've signed you a 3-year contract. Like, my whole plan is that you're going to be here next year so I can get this next guy. Like, I can't let you go if you're the best player. Like, that shouldn't happen in sports. That only happens, like I say, in extreme circumstances, right? Like, like usually what happens in sports for people who don't know is it's either you are really unhappy, which is going to be legit. They're going to be able to feel that. Or the other one, which is also a good one, is, maybe you were there for 7 years and you were the franchise player, but even the guy who's the GM can acknowledge, like, we didn't win and, I gave it my best crack, right. So can I go out elsewhere now? These ones that you're seeing in CS where players leave, they've been there for like a year. Like, some of them are just young kids who haven't realized, like, you'll get a chance to go somewhere else in 2 years, mate. But if you signed the deal now, you got to see it through. Kind of, you're committed to this org, and they don't do that, sadly. So Liquid, that's one area that'll probably be very undervalued. People won't know it, unfortunately, because they've done a good job containing the leaks, as it were. But there was a lot of times in Liquid that like half this team could have been out the door. In all the other teams, it would have been everyone else in NA would have benefited, mate.
Yeah, and well, you can think of a guy like Stewie. He has a really exciting play style. He's a dynamic personality. That's money in the bank for Cloud9 when they have him. Like, you're letting him go isn't just quality of team you're losing. You're losing a guy that branding-wise brings you bucks. Sure. So, yeah, for Jack to let him go, it's I guess that's one way to be an owner, but I mean, I don't know if it's something about esports where it's more tied to social media and to just the online aspect where guys feel that pressure from kind of the peanut gallery.
Yes.
Whereas owners of sports teams generally just don't care.
Yeah, you are right on that one. For people who don't know, even though, yes, like athletes are on social media nowadays, it's right. Like, there's no, like, let's be real, most GMs and stuff, even if they have a Twitter account, they're not listening to random plebs. Like, they don't give a fuck what anyone says there. But you are right. That's the thing that people have exploited at the moment, is that if a player himself ever decided to go public with it, every fan in the world is just going to tell you have to let them go. Like, oh, come on, he's unhappy or whatever. Whereas it's like, in a sports context, maybe because we have an older audience. In the sports context, the fans are going to be like, no, fucking make him stay. He's the best player. Why would we let our star player leave the team?
Yeah. I wonder if that's related to it, but I just think that owners on that end of things really should just ignore players that try and give pressure like that. And it's on the players to make sure their contracts give them freedom. It's really not the owner's responsibility if you sign a 4-year deal that pays you well and actually treats you well. No, I've done my job as an owner in that sense. I've taken care of you. I've committed to you. And now I need to make back my investment on you.
Absolutely.
I just don't understand letting a guy like Stewie go. Although right now, I'm getting to benefit from that because he's on Liquid and they're just a pleasure to watch. So it's hard to complain.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't understand. There's kind of that bias right now, I think, against orgs because a lot of contracts and a lot of things,
There's a lot of bad stories, sure.
Yeah, the FaZe Tfue relationship. There's a lot of kind of anger and angst against orgs, but
there's also the angle as well, mate. Like, to be fair, anything that's a company in the modern world, for good reason, people look at companies and they think that's what's ruined the world. These are all the scumbags who steal all the money. And they don't realise, like, they are right. Like, especially because obviously if you ever see any of these articles, they'll tell you like Cloud9's worth $100 million or something crazy, but you have to realise, like, if it is worth $100 million, the only companies that are as small as Cloud9 that are worth $100 million would be like some sort of a tech startup. Like, it's not many people actually in Cloud9, like the actual people you're talking about are like esports lifers who, were here from the early days, have been grinding. Like, it's not some big it's not like Monsanto owns Cloud9 or something, like, it's not really even an evil corporation. Like, I always tell people, it's just businessmen, but like on a low level. So the problem with that one is like, people are too biased against them, like you say. It's like, listen, let's hold them accountable. Absolutely. Let's not let them fuck people over. But there's a degree to which, like, these companies have to make money too, guys. Like, for the space to work, for us to be able to enjoy the product, like, they have to be able to make money. And so as a result, people don't know this, but at the moment, that is the person who gets squeezed the most, is the team. It's just that at the moment, because they all want to be in line for one day if there ever is an NFL of esports and they want to have their space in it, they're all willing to put up with it at the moment. Like, it's kind of like sadly, the depressing thing about where esports is at the moment is, for teams, it's just the Hunger Games, mate. Your job is just survive. You don't have to be the best now. You don't even have to make any money now. All you have to do is, when eventually it gets, in assuming it does, to a scenario, like I said, like there's an NFL of esports, as long as you have one of those franchises, everything you did was worth it. Because at that point in time, the idea is you're set for life at that point.
Yeah, and the problem is that, honestly, the greater odds are that a bubble bursts and it takes longer for esports to reach the heights we want. Because, I mean, how many orgs actually make money right now?
It's very, very few, I can tell you.
I mean, Liquid overall spends a ton, but they also are wildly popular across popular games, so maybe they're making back 80% of the money they're spending. I don't know, but even like Liquid, they're wildly popular and wildly successful. But man, do they spend money to do that? And you see other orgs that aren't willing to do what they do.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but I would like to focus a little more just on like Counter-Strike as a scene right now. Because, I think it helps contextualize how good Liquid is and just where the scene's at. Honestly, I've wondered about this, and maybe you can think it's just a stupid thought, but the way you talk about teams' map pools in CS, I wonder if a similar way of talking about it can be just applied to the Counter-Strike scene as a whole, where there's depth and width to the scene. Because I feel like right now we're just on the verge of an era where we might have not only unprecedented width, because there's just lots of good teams, but we might have like unbelievable depth in the scene as well. Because if Astralis can get things back together, which they've shown a lot of
There's a lot of potential still, for sure. Yeah, it's not over for them at all.
Right. So if Astralis gets it together, if Na'Vi is anything okay and starts...
Absolutely. If Bumich is even 5% better than Edward, game on, right?
Well, I mean, even with Edward, when you saw them last summer, the moment Electronic looked like a legitimate player, that's all Simple needs. So you have those teams. You have Vitality, which is looking really strong. You have ENCE, and, they'll probably take more of a backseat in that discussion. But if that's your 5th or 6th best team in the world right now, say in 3 months, that's an amazing 6th.
I'll even go one further, mate. Think about it this way. This is the reason why having an era is so incredibly difficult. Right. Is because it's not like having an era means beat, like if I line up the top 10 teams in the world, it's not like I just say beat like 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 of these and you can have an era. No, what happens is you beat the 8 or 9. Let's say you do the best job ever and you beat all 10. Well, congrats. There's now 10 teams who, if there's any possibility to do an upgrade in roster or to make some sort of a drastic change, will probably do it, because you've beaten them so hard that they're not even willing to wait. So as a result, when you're a team like Astralis, I'll probably do a piece on this one day, you actually have to beat like 2 or 3 waves of teams to stay on top for that long, because they do make the roster moves. They come back with that player thinking they're going to beat you, and they either do, in which case you get supplanted and someone else becomes the top team again, and we have like an interesting turnover, or you were just so insanely good you stay on top. So let's look at the teams you have now. Like you say, you see the strength of the current crop. Well, assuming Team Liquid stays on top and they beat these squads with consistency, right? Well, I can tell you what will happen. 100% Ents will pick up someone like Sonny if he's available. So there's an interesting move where maybe they get more fragging power, but a little bit less tactics. You have a team like MIBR's going through a bunch of changes. All it's going to take is eventually, hasn't happened yet, but eventually they're going to hit a lineup that'll be good again. It'll do some damage. Obviously, the Swedes are completely off the chessboard at the moment, but all they'd need to do is make a super team and we'd have something interesting. I still think the one that everyone forgets about is Denmark, because the problem Denmark has at the moment is they've now got like 3 teams that are all sort of like 11th or 12th best in the world, but there's no like number 2 team like you used to have with North. Yeah. If they ever make another really good Danish team, that'll be right there. And then the other interesting one to me is Vitality, because right now... Mate, the moment Vitality realises they aren't going to win long term and that they start to get frustrated, you know the French, mate, there'll be a move. There'll be a move where, you know, in comes, I don't know who it'd be at this point in time, might not even be Shoxakenis, maybe it's someone like Amanek or something. There'll be some move where they can get better. So for Team Liquid, that's what's cool is, first of all, like you said before, because they've got such like almost a rotating cast of potential number 1 players, I think that can give them insane longevity that another team doesn't have, because you're not beholden to OllieJ to be number 1 to win the game. In fact, what's crazy at the moment with their team is Simple and Ziwu can actually be better than OllieJ. It doesn't matter. They're going to win anyway. So, but that's the other part is I actually think these other teams, their response will be roster moves, because this is the other thing about teams and players. They're all plebs in a way. Like what they do is, whoever's number 1, initially they deny it and they're like, no, we can beat them, you know, if it's our day. Then when they start losing, they're like, oh, it's getting hard, but you know, like we'll give it a shot. And then eventually they're like, oh, well, whatever they do must just be the best. So I can tell you the knock-on effect of Team Liquid will be the other teams will all just go for the gamble skill upgrade. Right. They will all go that route. So that's why I say Ents will try and get Sonny, and then whoever will get, the French will get more of a super team aspect going, because that they will think that that's the natural counter. It might be. Maybe that's what will make the scene amazing in 6 months from now.
And the thing is, say 6 teams gamble like that, at least 2.
You've got to have at least 1 or 2. Right? Yeah, exactly. Of course.
So, and what's great is there's so many teams that could gamble like that and succeed. If you look at even HLTV's top 20, look at Mouse in 10th. Sure. Say that they reach 5th, and there's just some piece they need to change. You don't think Kerrigan can take that team back to the top? Even if it means that one player changes out, like that team's unbelievable. That's also a good example as well, mate, because since it is by definition a multinational team, they have way less sort of like reason to have to stick with one player, and crucially, they have more players available to them. Like people don't realize that as well. Is as long as Mouse can manage the financials, you can have a lot of players in a team like that, because there's a lot of players like think of some of the players in the Danish scene that just don't do anything at the moment. Like what you think someone like Carrigan wouldn't fucking love to play with like Config or something. Of course, he'd tear it up with someone like that, you know. And it's a possibility, you know, if you, as you say, if you get high enough in the rankings and it's an attractive offer, that you could do the gamble upgrade that could make you amazing. Right, exactly. And I mean, even the Swedish teams, I'm actually interested to hear what you think. I really think that Fnatic needs to just meet with Nip and make something happen, and probably leave behind most of the old guard. I think Rez on Fnatic would be really interesting. But what do you think about the Swedish scene? Because for a moment it looked like Fnatic would be in that 5th to 10th. Sure. And then all of a sudden they weren't as good. And I'm just wondering what you think the right move is, because I don't know, Nip, it feels like just doesn't give up players historically, except for the back end. And yeah, unfortunately, it's funny that all this stuff's come out with the Florida Nip, because what you're actually starting to see now, basically, is the reasons why the Swedish scene famously wasn't the one where you would have the obvious transfer would always happen. Like, if you look at the Danish scene, almost every move that should have happened eventually, you know, they gave every chance. People were willing to go between teams.
But you look at the Swedish scene with Nip and Fnatic. First of all, like you say, nobody Nip's like a fucking black hole, mate. You can't escape the event horizon if you're actually a good player. You can only come out if you're a shit player and they kick you out, basically. Yeah. At which point, anyone who picks you up is gambling. And then the Fnatic side of things is, because they had so much success, that core has just run the team forever. And so now it's only JW and Crims left now, but they still run the fucking team. They're the ones with the 3-year contracts, you notice. Like, the problem with that is, how do you oust one of those players if they start playing bad? You can't. They have the power. And so the real issue is, you kind of need to make a super team like you're saying. But I agree with you. If at this point in time, if I'm picking players, well, since both of those cores have had lots of chances and it's not that good at the moment, I would just leave them behind. I would start the team with like Rez, Brolan. I'd be going that route, and then I'd see who out of the old ones I'm taking. Like, maybe I can keep Crims if he has his motivation. You know, it's like at that point in time, though, you want less and less of those parts because you want to make a new squad. Because I also think that's part of what's ruined Swedish CS. Like, I don't buy the idea that there's just no in-game leaders. What that suggests to me is that the actual players don't care about in-game leaders. And that's true. I can tell you, within those two teams, Nip and Fnatic, these were the teams where, because the players had a lot of, like, they were very loose playing styles, so the players feel like they did a lot of the things that made them successful. So to them, they still think, an in-game leader is just a guy who just calls something at the beginning of the round and then we do what we want. Well, the problem with that is if you have that mentality, you're already not really going to buy into a guy who's going to come in like, no, I'm a real in-game leader. Like, here's my system. Here's what we're going to do. So, unfortunately, their sort of people aren't interested in that. And so that's why another move I actually was trying to push for hard the last few months is, before Carrigan joined Mouse, I even said, dude, if I'm these Swedish teams, I'm going to Carrigan and tell him, fuck it, we'll go English if it means you can join the team. That would have been a dream pickup to me. Could have revitalized either of them.
And I mean, now that he's got the mouse experiment going, that's not a route that could happen. But man, if you imagine even some other org says, all right, Kerrigan, we're going to buy out whatever Swedish players you think are the right ones to have. You don't think Kerrigan could build an amazing team of 4 Swedish players in himself?
Sure.
And what could a guy like Rez be? You see with the young players over in Mouse that the moment Kerrigan gets there, it seems like he just understands how to use them. How could some of those like Brolan and Rez and the rest of those guys that are the younger, what if they had a real in-game leader to just exemplify their good traits and make them comfortable to become exactly the player they need to be? I mean, yeah, we need a player like that in the Swedish scene.
Oh, absolutely.
And it kind of makes it sad because it was Golden, right? That you thought
he looked like he had some potential. Yeah, unfortunately, I think that trend's gone at this point in time. In it, like but even if he doesn't work out, don't let him go somewhere else. Don't kick out the guy that's giving it a go. Like, ride the guy. If he doesn't work a year or a year and a half later, get the next guy in that's willing to go that route. And that's kind of, like you're saying, one of the problems is some of these guys don't want to put themselves underneath that guy that's learning what to be in the IGL role. But yeah, you might just end up with these fragging teams that never really make it into the top echelon of play. Funny thing is, I actually feel like the Carrigan issue, I mean, to toot my own horn, again, I have been absolutely fucking proven right on that entire topic, because what happens is, this happens every time, mate, is when someone is an individual slump or they've had problems in a last team, fans will always think, this is the problem with fans, is they'll never let you this is why you'd never listen to them about transfers. They'll never let you do a transfer that isn't blatantly the largest upside ever with no downside to the move. Like, they want every single transfer to be like, I kick out the worst player in basketball and sign LeBron James. Like, well, everyone can say that's a good transfer, but the point is, when the fuck would that ever be available for, like, the 8th best team? It isn't, is it? And then, so what happens is, if you're like the 8th best team, you're going to have to gamble. Whatever move you do is going to have to be a gamble, because why the fuck is a really good player joining the 8th best team? So what you need to do is you need to do the gamble that has the lowest downside and the biggest upside. So to me, when I see a move like the Carrigan one, I never even thought Carrigan was bad in phase. It's just, it obviously didn't work in phase at the end. So to me, it's like, right, well, if you take him and put him in a different team, you have a chance to have one of the best in-game leaders again. And even more so, of all the in-game leaders, because he'd shown he was willing to speak English and be in multinational teams. I couldn't even believe this, mate. Like, some teams did push hard, but if you knew the short list I had of teams who didn't even bother reaching out, it's unbelievable. Like, this guy should have been the highest, like the most anticipated free agent in years, because think of all the teams he could have like instantly started setting right. Because like you say, if you give him your team and you have a bunch of skilled players, the secret he has that makes him so good is he can simultaneously listen to the player and actually like listen to what the guy wants and what he says he needs. But he also has the experience to know when it's like, right, I should do the other thing though. I should tell you actually, you might think you want that, but you know what, mate, you're a different type of player actually. I'm going to put you, say, like, so for example, I'll give you a great example right now. Right. One of the things people won't understand about Team Liquid, because it's very subtle, is when Twists first joined Team Liquid back in 2017, because he'd been like a super skilled player, but on much, much worse teams, he was a beta. He basically used to just sort of play very selfish, which is what happens when you're really skilled and you're a bad team, because you think to yourself, the only chance to win the round is I have to be alive and I have to put myself in the situation to win the game, right? You won't sacrifice yourself like you would on a better team, because on a better team, you have to know, you know, someone else is going to trade for me, or this is going to give information, or, you know, we can't win the round if I bait too much at this point and I don't push into an area, right? So what happened was, by default, he wouldn't have chosen to be the player he is. But then what they did is, you know, at one point they moved him into the entry pack. Now they've sort of moved him away again. You see how over time you sort of need, this is why I think in American sports, one of the things you guys have nailed the most in North American sports is the coaching angle. Like the fact that you have proper coaching from the time you're a youth. So by the time you hit the pro level, you've already had loads of really smart guys who have experience who can do this sort of process with you. You know, they can look at what you're doing, take it to the next level, or they can even tell you, you know what you're doing is pretty good now, but if you shift over to this other role, I reckon you could be the best. If you just figure that out on your own, it's tough to get there. There's not a lot of players are that sort of self-directed, I don't think. So to me, someone like Carrigan, it's almost a joke how he just does this with every player he comes across somehow. He just activates them all. There's very few players I can think of have ever played on Carrigan and not been good. Very few.
Yeah. And that's honestly, like you mentioned that, and I kind of wondered if that was the case with Carrigan, because it seemed like the market was cold on him. But outside of Simple and maybe Nico, I mean, FaZe chose Nico, and a couple other players, I'm picking the IGL that you know will make your team good over anyone but the most transcendent star.
If you're making a team, it's unfortunately players don't think this way, mate, but I agree. If I'm making a team and we're doing like a draft, yeah, here's the thing. If we're doing the like fantasy draft right now and I'm third or fourth in line and you guys have just picked Simple, Nico, Twists, you know, whoever, like the super sick players, yeah, I absolutely would go straight Carrigan, because there's the difference, right? If I take Carrigan at number 4 and then your turn, you take Electronic, you know, you go the route that most people do, you keep taking the stars. The difference is there's always still going to be some super sick star. Like, you notice in this scenario, I could still pick Zero at that point in time or something ridiculous, or, you know, like, and then I've got Carrigan and Zero and you've now got Simple and, well, who? You know, maybe you could get Glaive. Like, you know, there's not many names. Like, if you're even doing the fantasy draft, it's hard to counter that.
Like, honestly, my opinion would be outside of Simple and maybe now Ziwu, I'm taking Carrigan to build a team around. Because the thing about having such a deep scene right now is that, the good fraggers are a dime a dozen. It's only the transcendent players that you have to have. And after that, it's just a team that works. You see, even with Astralis, Device reached heights at moments, but most of the time it's just the team that works, not the
absolutely, yeah.
And with Liquid, right now OllieJ is just on a rampage. But from the beginning of this run, it's not that there's just this one guy that's dominating. It's high firepower overall, but also just that team play and dynamic that you're talking about. And I trust Carrigan probably over any other IGL. If you just abandon kind of the context of situations, I trust Carrigan to build a random team more than anyone else, probably.
That's why the real killer for me, because I love what ifs and hypotheticals and counterfactuals, you know, because obviously they're fun to think through. Like, you know, how would it have gone differently? And it tests your analytical skills a little bit to try and because the key thing is you have to figure out what you really think before you think of the player scenario. You have to figure out like what the principle at hand here. So one of the bigger what ifs for me is what would have happened to FaZe if they hadn't have done the signing of Guardian and Orfmeister. Because if you remember, they were a really good team already. It's just that unfortunately they bombed that major really hard, that PGL Krakow. So what people don't realise is with that, since that team was already very, very good, and at the time that was when they had the real access to the phase money, where you could sign anyone who you wanted. Hence why they did sign Guardian and Olaf Meister and got like the super team together. Well, the problem with that one is that move in its own way was like what we call like, do you know the idiom cursed chalice?
Right, yeah.
Poison chalice. Like the concept is, if someone hands you this big golden goblet and says, "You want to drink from this?" Like you can't say no, can you? It's a fucking priceless But if they tell you, but it is cursed, it's like, I have to give it a go, don't I, and hope the curse doesn't affect me. But the problem is, odds are it will. So when you're signing players like that, I even remember when the signing was done thinking, fucking hell, like, this is going to be hard to make work. Like, no one's ever done a team like this. But how could he say no if someone offered you the chance? Right? He even told me that. He basically said, like, this is one thing about Carrigan as well that people don't know. I often try to make this point, but people don't get it. Most in-game leaders and pro players in general, for good reason, are a little bit delusional, Like, they never truly believe they deserved that loss, and they always think they should have won an extra game, and, like, stuff like that. But Carrigan is one of the most down-to-earth in that sense, and he even told me, he said, this is before FaZe had ended as well, he said, you know what, if people criticise me in this team, they should. I have the best players in the world. What a fucking sick mentality that is. That's pretty baller, isn't it?
Yeah. Honestly, I kind of just want you to have more stuff with him on it, but I
Sure.
guess that's not reality. But man, if you could imagine having like a CSGO talk show with Carrigan.
Oh, it'd be the best.
Tell that guy to retire so that we can have...
The problem is, it's like you're saying, the big problem is a lot of the best in-game leader type people, they also understand like the power of information. So they're very, very careful what they let out when they're actually in a top team now, or what they're willing to say. Because, for example, I mean, people might not realize this, but since the good thing about CS is you play the same opponents over and over again. So, it's not about me beating Vitality this week. It's about how am I going to beat them the next 3 times I play them over the So part of what you're even doing when you play them is, say in one game I play them and I beat them, but just narrowly, I might now have to think to myself, right, whatever I did there, they're going to hone in on. They were already close to stopping it there. I should probably set it up so next time, I start with like a different approach and maybe weave back in some of what worked there, but try something new. You're always also sort of like one eye on the next matchup and what that anticipation is. That's like kind of the in-game leader head-to-head battle that's going on. The players don't know. They're just fucking trying to shoot people in the head with the crosshair on them. They think that's CS. But when you're the leaders and you're having that like high-level chess match, as it were, you're thinking about these sorts of factors and what you're going to have to change up. And so it gets pretty intense. And as a result, though, you don't want to tell someone, I think the reason I beat Vitality that time is, I had sort of like, I understood the way like the rotation worked off the A site and I was hitting that like, you don't want to tell the opponent that. You want to make him wait as long as possible to figure that part out and then realise, that's what he was doing all along. Right, now I'm going to transition and do this over here. But it'd be amazing if you get that insight, I agree.
I mean, and the best example in sports of that is Bill Belichick, where if you try and interview him about anything that's going on currently with his team, it's, we're working on it, and that's it.
Dude, the maddest I heard about him, this is actually an anecdote I heard that's insane, is supposedly he even tells players who play for him, even when you're retired, don't ever tell anyone any of the Patriots calls.
Yeah.
Because, another team would say, well, it doesn't matter, we're going to get a new head coach eventually, and we change all the calls anyway. No, he would tell them all. And I've seen interviews where some of them said, we were doing this player. I can't tell you the call, though. And it's like, well, you're on about, you've been retired 10 years. Like, the fucking... Yeah. But that's the whole thing. He's that secretive. He understands that you let any info out there, it can help someone. Yeah.
And what's insane, though, is that he's apparently they're releasing a top 100 all-time players list, where he's one of the 2 analysts for it. And the guys that were working with him on it for when it's released say, when he's talking about the history of players, he's actually an amazing analyst. Obviously, he understands the game. So, and he'll just talk and talk and talk about all the ways they're excellent, all the ways he would think of using them, the way in which they were perfect at what they did. Of course he can do that. I mean, he wouldn't have the mind to be a coach if he didn't. And yet, when it comes to right now with this team, he says nothing. So that's, exactly. A guy like Carrigan,
This actually ties in, by the way. You might like this because I have a piece of content that I have a plan I want to try and do. The problem is it's not something I can just do overnight, so it's trickier to set up. But it's the sort of thing where I'm going to go piece by piece. Like I'm going to find one guy who's into it. We'll do the piece of content. I'll hope that I can show that then to another person. They'll get what I'm trying to do. We'll make it with them, and it'll have to sort of gradually come out. But basically, I found a channel that was about football, European soccer, that is.
Yeah.
And what they did on this channel was, they had access to a bunch of coaches, managers in football, and they basically just took these managers, and this is the genius part of the mechanism. You make them do a team they don't currently manage, so they don't feel like the same, like I can't talk about what I was doing. And what you do is you pick like basically the most perfect game from their career in terms of maybe it was a big upset of like a championship team, or it was when they won a championship themselves. And the idea is, because they don't coach that team anymore and they're free to talk about the players, in talking about what they were trying to do in that match, they can then reveal basically their philosophy on the team. Like, I was using this guy as like a decoy, and then this person was the main striker, or whatever the scenario was. And here was how I adapted the tactics because I knew this team liked to attack the midfield or whatever. So I played more defensive play, whatever the angle is. It's super fascinating though when you watch these videos. Now, the problem is obviously, like, soccer's not really my thing, mate. So that part of it didn't pop for me. But I remember watching it and thinking, basically, I'll even say this. The reason I don't mind saying this idea here is if anyone else goes and scoops me and does it, great. I'd like to see this fucking feature too. So save me the time if you can. But I don't think anyone's going to do it, mate. But what you'd need to do, I've realised, to make it good, is what they did for the soccer angle was, they had in front of the guy when he was explaining, he had like a table set up that looked like a pitch, and he had like, a little circle marker for each player. And then what they would do is that's how he would illustrate his point. He'd say, I would have the two wingers move up, and then he'd move the little, circles up, and he'd say, and then they'd be attacking. And in doing so, he could illustrate what he was talking about. Basically, what you need to make this really work is you need to do the concept I'm talking about, but in one of those like programs that exist in CS where you can show the top-down tactical aspect. Because the idea is we don't need to see the in-game footage at all. We don't need to see what the player did with his crosshair. We just need to know, why did you move Shocks to this corner here while this other player was pushing behind, for example, That's what would be amazing. Because I feel like that sort of footage, especially, like I say, if you could get to the people who there's nothing to give up now. Like, for example, an obvious pick for me would be like Pronax. Let's get him and go back to the classic Fnatic era and find out what was he trying to do when he played against the French teams that he always beat, or for example, what was hard about when he used to lose to the Danish teams? What were they doing? That's where whatever their take is, I'd be fascinated to know. It'd be so interesting to get that insight, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and man, like if you manage to do that, that'd be such a trailblazing thing. Not surprised.
Sure.
You've done a few things. What's hard, of course, is that in kind of established sports like football or American football or NBA, there's so much money in providing entertainment angles.
Absolutely,
that you just have these amazing genius guys that have retired that are doing that stuff. Whereas for you, there's just more money in, like God B, there's just more money being on a team and continuing to play than stepping into that kind of thinking about CS in general type of role. You have to be pretty much a traveling analyst, or there's just, you've got a niche that you've carved out, but not everyone wants to put in all that work.
They don't, mate. They don't. It doesn't seem as much. I know everyone says like, anyone could just do a load of videos. Like, just go for it then. I'll meet you at the end. We'll see who did it better. No, that's exactly why, mate. Unfortunately, that's the one thing we lack still. And to be fair, what people don't realize is it's still not at the moment that fair to tell these guys to retire, because if you see how it goes in the world of coaching, it's just like sports, and that's it. You can get canned as a coach tomorrow, mate. Like, they can just decide this team didn't work out and you're fired. And so if I'm someone like God B, where as a player you're barely hanging on anyway in terms of your actual in-game value. If you go and become a coach and it doesn't work out, listen, you'll probably get a little bit longer because you got B. You might get 2 years. But after that period in time, maybe no one wants you, or maybe no one's fucking with you anymore. And also, in a lot of teams now, they've gotten finally good coach salaries, but it took a while, mate. That was the other thing. You were even getting paid less money. So unfortunately, if you were the obvious candidates in existence, God B, Sean Gares, you were just going to hang on for dear life. You were just going to basically, because I always used to say this, right? When the Virtus Pro guys famously used to get 20,000 euros a month, right? Think about it this way. They're not thinking to themselves like we are, well, this lineup's not good enough. We're never going to win with this. No, they're thinking to themselves, Every month I stay, 20,000 euros more. So, right, what happens then is, if you have one little good result, maybe I don't retire from this team, actually. Maybe I stay 3 more months. Because remember, every day you get to that first of the month, oh, what's that? 20k in my account. I might find a reason to stick around next month as well. It's no wonder no motherfucker was retiring, is it? I get it. I totally get it.
And I mean, when you think of living in Poland, 20,000.
Oh, they were balling out of control, mate. Yeah.
Like a couple years of that and you're good. So why would you quit 1 year before that hurdle?
That's why, actually, the people who fucked up the most, Richard nailed this a couple of years ago, and by the numbers, is once the writing was on the wall that VP wasn't going to be good anymore. And if you notice, people like Neo and Taz, their individual games fell off years ago, mate. Like, they were like, a lot of what kept them going was experience, and like good under pressure and all this sort of shit. Maybe know how to use other players. It was like it was almost like the secondary factors of being a player. It wasn't like the direct, like they couldn't shoot people's heads off. What they should really have done is, yes, get the good salary from Virtus Pro, establish yourself that way. But what they should have done is about 2 years ago, they should have taken all of these people that are coming into esports. I can tell you, I have people all the time that come in where, no joke, this is what they basically tell me. It's like, I can raise any amount of money you want. How do I get like a top 10 CSGO team? And the problem is I always tell them like, well, first of all, when you say any money, if you just want a top 10 team, we're going to have to fucking pay the massive premium, aren't we? Like, no one's going to sell a team, mate. So you better have 100 billion if you want that. Like, there's ridiculous. If you want to, or you gamble on a lesser team and, you hope they become good. So what he should have done was, when one of those people came in, said, I'll build an org with you. Just give me a percentage, give me equity in it. And the point is, at that point in time, they still had the power back then where they could have gotten, first of all, they could have gotten a couple of the Virtus Pro guys. They could have gotten any of the talent in Poland. If they'd have really wanted to, which I would have told them to do, I would have gone international already. I would have got, like, someone like, this is another thing, is when your credit runs out in your domestic scene, because they play with you every day, it usually lags on the international scene. So actually the best example ever is, even when in the French scene, a lot of people didn't want to play with Existence, actually the offers were always there internationally. Like, he could have been in like a FaZe Clan or, Mouse Sports. Like, these sorts of teams still valued him. So what players often don't understand is, you have to sort of know when your opportunity's there like that, and you have to take it, because that's how you're going to get to the next level. Like, if right now we're talking like 2 years into a project that Neo owned, and maybe now you're finally getting like a top 10 team, that could, you could be set for life off that if that becomes a real org.
Man, actually, you mentioned Existence. Swap him into Neo spot right now. See what happens.
I'd love to see it. Sure.
Just because, I mean, like Neo was an IGL for one group of guys that all kind of worked together. That's not the same thing as being an in-game leader as your career with whoever comes in and making things work. It's just like, honestly, with Nitro right now, amazing what he's doing. But if he goes on 2 years from now to IGL, another team, to even top 5.
Put it this way, here's the case, right, is if you gave Nitro, today's Nitro, the team that Daps has in Cloud9.
Right.
Who knows? I have no idea. That could go really bad. Maybe it'd be amazing. Maybe it'd be terrible, though.
Yeah, exactly.
You kind of feel like it's unproven, isn't it?
And that's, of course, what makes Kerrigan disgusting, is he just... You put him somewhere.
Every team, mate. It's ridiculous, isn't it? It's ridiculous, isn't it?
So... And even like a guy like Gabi, where his own level is just so atrocious, but kind of whatever team he has, he makes something happen with.
They're always going to have something to him. Yeah.
Yeah, there's just guys like that where you can trust them and build around them. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm actually excited for CSGO. I feel as though the scene, well, right now, I mean, there's teams like Renegades and Heroic that are 15th to 17th in the world. If
they can still fuck shit up, mate, if they have the right game.
Yeah, I mean, do you really think that it's a huge upset if they beat someone like NRG, who's rated 5th?
No.
Like, the width of teams that are legit is so interesting right now. And
that's also, by the way, like, if you think about it, the reason why I said before there's still so many like upgrades possible, because the talent's so spread out.
Man, I think that within 3 months after the major, because that's, people get mad at what happens at a major.
Yeah, of course.
And I think we could have, if Liquid not only wins the major, but then they keep dominating as we have some of these shuffles that I anticipate. We could have 5 or 6 unbelievable teams and Liquid still on top. And that would probably institute the greatest era by far.
I'll tell you also the one no one's thought about here, mate. And this is the one that this is where I will always have a job in this industry, mate, because just experience tells me where to look before people think to look there, right? So here's the one no one stopped to think about. Mm-hmm. You think Astralis is just going to lose forever and do nothing?
Oh, no.
No, mate. If they had the next 3 or 4 months, they don't win the major. Let's say they don't win any more championships. That can happen. You know, you could just be a very good number 3. You could just be making the semis every time, and then you lose to Vitality or you lose to Astralis. Mm-hmm. Maybe you win one small tournament. A team like that, that's so used to winning, that's the team that as soon as they know they can't win, will make the big move. And I tell you right now, there's so many exciting ways they can go. The obvious one is if they ever call up Valde to their team, whew, I'd like to see that. I'd like to fucking see that team work.
That's one thing. Valde and IGLing.
I feel like that can't be a long-term solution. Like, he's too good a player. That's the problem. You know, he's just too good.
Yeah, and that's where I want some other IGL to take the Danish scene and get. You mentioned guys like Config and get Valde and make a legitimate number 2 instead of. Because that's another thing. What if the Danish scene suddenly puts another team together and, say Valde goes to Astralis and a guy like Magix or Dupree
anyone. That's the good thing. Anyone drops off, we'll take him. I'll have him tomorrow.
Exactly. And suddenly you have another team that should be top 5, except that the top 5 could end up being unbelievably crowded when you think about the different teams like Mouse and Navi and everyone. Like, I just think, and part of it is this last month where we've had some good events finally. There's kind of this desert period here after the major. But man, I'm excited for CS and I'm just revved up to see what happens. Because, man, I mean, even if Liquid doesn't win, and they won't win every event, if they can be the best team in the era I think might be coming, man, that'd be something to watch.
Well, the cool thing is, like you're alluding to there, is this is what people don't get about Team Liquid, is I would totally give it up. Yeah, the first part of their era was the weakest, obviously, because that was when there was no Astralis, even Navi skipped a few events. You know, yeah, that part sucks, because even though, if you asked me, gun to my head, I would say that Liquid would have beaten them. I can't know. Yeah. They weren't there, so they couldn't play them. But if the first part was easy, if they continue, they're going to be against the hardest part maybe ever. Like, if you look at any other team's era, no one had, like, that many teams that were dangerous, especially because, like you were saying there as well, mate, you throw in teams like Heroic. These teams, listen, they're not themselves ever going to win events, but they can fuck your event up. They can take you out in the upper bracket if you give them the right maps and the right guy goes off, you know. It's going to be rough. So as a result, if they dominate, there'll be no excuses. In fact, that's the thing I would say is if you're a fan, if you're a Team Liquid fan and you're annoyed, that's like, what the fuck? Like, you know, I gave it up to Astralis when they were the best. Why is everyone shitting on Team Liquid? Don't worry. The good thing about plebs is they always stay in the moment, right? So whoever wins like today, they can't see like the future and the past. They get obsessed with the moment. So, but the good thing about that is if you give them long enough, they all turn. They'll all eventually change their mind. Like the same people. Yeah. People will forget this. When Astralis had already had like an insane start, like I think when they came into the first major that they played, the first sit major, they'd won maybe like 5 tournaments and they'd had like, you know, 1 or 2 seconds as well. And, you know, like really impressive stuff. People back then even were like, yeah, but if they don't win this major, they're not even going to have an era, are they? And it was like, well, that's, you know, you can take that if you want, mate. But the point is, like, eventually, there was no excuses by the end. Like, everyone changed, and all of a sudden, it's like you couldn't find someone who didn't used to believe in Astralis. All of a sudden, everyone knew Astralis was going to be the best, and they all knew from the beginning. What are you talking about? I always said they would be. And so the good thing is, keep your eye out now. In fact, if you really want to fuck with people, find someone now who's saying Team Liquid shit. Like, make a note of their Reddit account, and we'll see in 6 months what their flair is. All of a sudden, they'll just be like, I was ride or die till fucking Elise joined. You know, like, they'll just change so fast, it's unreal, mate.
Yeah, that's... And the thing is that I think if Liquid wins the major and 2 more events in the next 3 months, that's already... put that against any other period of time. Because, yeah, that's slow start. But this last month, they were dominant in a way that just isn't really conceivable.
It's the best stat is the one that someone found where they'd only lost one series out of something like 27. Something nuts like that, like stuff like shit that shouldn't even be possible. Like it's one thing to be dominant. That at that point in time, it's like, what was I supposed to win that one as well? Like, what more was I supposed to do?
And like you were saying, just even about their map pool, where they just have these 70% win rates all over the place.
Oh, it's bonkers, isn't it?
And
that's a very, very good sign as well going forwards.
Like, you're not supposed to play someone else on their best map when it's your fourth best map and beat them 7 times out of 10. That's like, the theory behind that being possible just sounds absurd.
All you need to know is this. Whenever I look at these victories that Team Liquid's having where they're like 2-0ing their opponents, I'm actually not seeing mistakes in the map pool veto from the opponent. Like, it's not, the opponent does the right thing. They ban either their perma or they ban, like, for example, let's say they don't play overpass. They go, right, Team Liquid's amazing overpass, better get that out there. But then all of a sudden your series is going to be like DOS 2 Inferno and you're like, well, shit, I thought I was supposed to help me. Like, now I'm going to lose 2-0 again. Like, there's not really actually many good options to go with. So that's also a sign at that point that's just that the other team's too good. You have to, I mean, you guys, know this if you from Canada, mate. It's mainly like a British saying. But like the saying is, if someone else wrecks you like that, you just tip your hat. It's like, right, I couldn't do anything. You win. I have to just give it up, don't I? Like, I tried my best. I did everything I could. But so sometimes the other guy's better. It just happens.
Well, I mean, sure, once you see ENCE play Liquid on Nuke, you go, oh, well, was that the right play? But of course that was the right pick.
Sure.
They had a great record on it. It's not Liquid's best map. It's kind of...
No, it was the right one. It was the right one to pick.
It's the right one to pick. And then 16-3. Like, what do you do when you pick the right map and you can't get to 5 rounds?
Absolutely.
So at this point, Liquid is they're just flexing so hard on the scene that the thing is that I like competition, but I kind of want this major to be their kind of stamp it down, show that there's I kind of want them to do what they did in the final versus ENCE. Only because I hate when people refuse to acknowledge what a team has done.
Well, just look at the 2 Astralis majors they won. It was the same thing, mate. Coming in, they'd always lost the event before, and so there'd always be the fans that were like, yeah, but maybe they're kind of showing weakness. But because both of those majors, when they got to the playoffs, they just stomped them. They just 2-0'd everyone, easily won. It's like after that happens, like you're saying, it's just the cap. It just makes it like we don't have to have this debate anymore, do we, guys? It gets over. They won.
Well, yeah, because the one against Navi and the one against ENCE was it one double-digit round between the 4 wins they got?
They were stomps.
Something like that?
Pretty much stomps, yeah.
It wasn't, 16-13, 16-14 to win. It was kind of like, well, thanks for showing up to our after party.
Like, put it this way, even if, let's say, like you say, with the turnover of the scene, let's say Team Liquid didn't end up being dominant beyond this, just for, like, satisfaction, it would be cool if they won this major to make it like, right, there's the solidified period where we were untouchable. Like, no one could fuck with us. And then, yeah, like you're saying, the idea would be what you want the major to be, really. In fact, I think this is probably the best description of what you want a major to be. What you want from a major is every team to play their best.
Right.
That would be the dream. And so if that means at the end... it's not like it's impossible for Vitality or something to win. That could happen. But the idea is if everyone plays their best, I can accept the result. And so if that means we all play our best and Team Liquid wins because at the moment they're the best, that seems fitting as well to me. I mean, that's cool.
Yeah.
I'm willing to take whatever results come from that.
Yeah, and then if there's a competitive era next where there's actually 3 or 4 teams that are all really good, that's the era after Liquid was just untouchably on top and stomped a major and showed everyone that they legitimately were by far the best North American team in a way that you didn't even think could happen, and among the top 5 teams of all time if they managed to stomp it out. So either way, it should be interesting, but kind of selfishly, I don't want this major to be that competitive for them, especially because all the other matchups can be interesting.
Oh, of course.
You could have tons of fantastic games and Team Liquid running through it, and that would just be a lot of entertainment for us on both ends, which would be great.
The sad thing is, like, it's been so long since we've ever actually had a period. Like, the last time I can even vaguely remember was maybe when, like, SK and FaZe were on top.
Right.
Like, I think it would be really cool at some point if we can get it, where I just want there to be an era where there's two teams that win everything. And the idea is, it's like, it's not, you never know which of the two is going to win, but it's like, you know, because basically they've been, like, Fnatic and LDLC used to sort of do this. It's like, right, I win 2 tournaments, you win 2, he wins 1, I win another. So that is the ultimate hype, really.
Oh, absolutely. And I guess that's one thing that's a bit of a letdown from 2018 is Liquid was absolutely good enough to be that team.
They could have, yeah.
They just had that mental thing against Astralis, because
I also think as well, right, there's another angle to this, right, which is, this is the brutal thing. So people know, if they watched last year, obviously Astralis never won every series. Like, they lost a couple to Na'Vi, they lost obviously one to FaZe, they lost like to SK at the end, they lost one to NiP. The problem was, that's when this is where Team Liquid really fucked up. It's one thing that Team Liquid fucked up all the finals, but all they needed was to be in position in one of those scenarios to where they played the team that beat Astralis in the final. Right. You know what I mean? Like, if they'd have played Na'Vi in a final, well, I know what happens when they play Na'Vi. I'd have fucking loved that game. That's the championship right there. But somehow, that's where they really got unlucky. It's one thing what they did against Astralis. They can only blame themselves for that. But they didn't get any fucking help with the other brackets, though.
And the couple times, like, they lost a final to Mouse, for example. The couple times they got there, it's like they weren't ready to be there, which was really disappointing, because even if Liquid has a couple wins outside of Astralis, that gives more hype to what Astralis is doing. Course. But the thing is that it doesn't change the fact Liquid was that good.
They could have done it.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things where they didn't do it, and so the Astralis dominance doesn't look as good as it was, which is really disappointing, because, or even that. Oh,
I agree, by the way. If they'd even beaten Astralis in one really great final, it would have made, you're right, it would have made it so that the difference is when a hater says, well, Astralis didn't play in a good area, you'd be like, what are you talking about? They had like Team Liquid. No, yeah, exactly. You'd have the instant counter, right?
Yeah, and this is actually one of those things where dominating so long, people forget how dominant you are. It's kind of like LeBron James in the Eastern Conference. Because he goes to the finals for 8 straight times, people just assume the East is weak. Astralis knocked off FaZe and just shut down any chances they had at being a dominant team. Then when Na'Vi looked good in the summer, Astralis just blanked them completely. And then throughout the whole year, they just wiped the floor with Liquid. Does that mean none of these teams had the talent and ability to be a number 1 team in a different era? No, it just means Astralis was too good and totally wiped them out. So I see that, and I just think, well, kudos to you. You were so dominant that your era looks boring and uncompetitive. But that is actually, a tip of the hat. And some people think the wrong way about it, which is, oh, they had no one competitive. No, they didn't let anyone be competitive.
You're right there, because here's the thing. There's actually a very, very similar concept that happens in tennis, actually, because it's such a 1v1 sport. You can have consistent results, you know. It's the same principle. Basically, right, what happens is Roger Federer is older than his current competitors, right? So he was competing and winning before Nadal and Djokovic and all these other guys came up to the top, right? And so what happened is, fans who didn't watch that era just always said, he just won all these easy champions. Like, no, what happened was, literally, I could go back to his era. I actually watched tennis a lot back then. I could go back and I could show you 3 or 4 people who were like, they were like, basically, if you'd have made a movie about any of these people, they're like the Harry Potter of tennis of their country. Like, they were supposed to be the next great player. Like famously, like one of Federer's main rivals, right, was the American player Andy Roddick. Right, people think Andy Roddick's a bomb because he only won 1 Grand Slam. The motherfucker was in like 4 Wimbledon finals or something mental against Roger Federer. Like, what's he supposed to do? Like, at this point in time, his problem is like what we're saying here. Like, Federer was too good, and because he was too good, he made his opponents look too bad, and therefore, to the pleb, they go, well, how can you be that good? Whereas the reason why they can acknowledge the current crop are good is because they've all beaten each other. So that makes everyone think, right, well, if you've beaten each other, that makes it even more impressive. That's the reason why, counterintuitively, Fnatic held on for so long in people's minds as the greatest team, because people know Fnatic lost to their rivals, but they still won most of the titles. So that makes it feel like simultaneously you were really competitive, but you still won the the most, therefore you must be the ultimate best. Because, it's funny, it doesn't work the other way around, you notice. Like, if you go into basketball, people have no problem saying Michael Jordan was the best. They don't mind that, I wouldn't do it personally, but if you wanted to hate on his era, there's a bunch of ways you could, never face the dominant center mainly, and only a couple of times he played Shaq. Oftentimes, at the time, the East was the best conference for him, the West was, there's like a million factors you could go with, but people are fine accepting they're the best. It's weird. Counter-Strike's the only game I notice where the more dominant you are, the less credit you get somehow. It's actually a bit bizarre in that sense. If you're in the NFL, they want you to win every game. That is the best team for them.
Yeah, and no one ever thinks, the Patriots have been to too many finals because everything's just weak right now in the league. It's like, no. Everyone knows the league in the NFL is amazing.
Sure.
And yet the Patriots just have better coaching, better game planning, more clutch, make it happen. In best of ones, it's pretty much statistically impossible they've been this dominant.
Oh,
they have been. It's disgusting. It's the same thing for the Astralis era, and as Liquid continues, it's the same thing. You shouldn't be able to win, and you talk about Dust 2 being their best map. You shouldn't be able to win as much as you do in these types of situations. It's only a credit to how unbelievably better you are that it happens.
No, absolutely.
I do want to talk about StarCraft 2.
Yeah, let's do it. We'll do a little section at the end on StarCraft 2. Let's do it. What have you got?
Well, my main thing is there was all this hype, and it's deservedly so about Cyril because he actually wins consistently against Koreans. And I hear people, even guys like Tastosis, the duo, they talk about, wow, Cyril's the best. And I just want your thoughts on this, because to me, if you don't go to the GSL and you don't go through that stacked event that takes months, that takes all the planning, that gives you time to actually strategize in the way that StarCraft is best to watch, and you don't go through that at least once in an era, can you really be the best player? For me, Maru is definitely the best player of this kind of era of StarCraft 2 with the 4 straight. But it seems like a lot of people think of Cyril as either equal to or better than him just because at the kind of mixed weekend events, he has done a little better.
Sure. Like, the thing is, I'm definitely in your camp on this one, mate. Like, you can make a case for both of them, but if I had to pick, the criteria I'm going with is exactly what you say. Like, difference is, I know that the hardest thing to win is the GSL. I don't care. Like, it's harder to win than WCS because at the end of the day, WCS is a weekend tournament. Like, you get going, you don't know what matchup you're going to play 2 rounds from now. So it's kind of like you go in with your form, you see who you play your best. If you win, you win. Great. If you don't, you don't. The difference in GSL, like you're saying, is GSL is, like, I'll be condescending here, it's real StarCraft. Like, you play this group that you knew every opponent, everyone's prepped all the matchups, then you go into the round of 8. In the round of 8, that opponent spends a whole week studying you, prepping for you, knows what you're going to play. In the next round, their whole team's working with them, study. Like, basically, that is like the ultimate expression because of how much like prep time, how much like practice time you put in. You know exactly who you're playing, you tunnel in on them. So here's the funny thing. If you know StarCraft history, right, because Cyril's a foreigner, the easy foreigner example is obviously Stefano, right? Because Stefano could beat anyone's ass as long as it was a weekend tournament, because this guy was just a genius. But I'll tell you what, it's not a coincidence he only went to like Korea very briefly. He didn't like that lifestyle, mate. He would. It's not only that he wouldn't have held up under it. He wouldn't even have like been broken. He would have just quit. He would have just said, "Fuck this shit. I go back home." Like, he would have just gone and won all it, because weekend tournaments was like, that made sense for his life. Well, the problem is that one's too easy an analogy. So I'll make this analogy for people because I think this is like the smoking gun. All you need to know is this. If being the best at weekend tournaments, as they're called, lands, if that showed you were the best, then forget MVP, forget fucking innovation, forget Maru, forget any of these players in history. The best player ever must be Tasia.
I was going to say
because I tell you what, Tasia could beat that ass of anyone if he was in a week. I've seen this guy like Merc MVP in his prime, But the difference is, when he went to the GSL, listen, he made a lot of round of 8s. He made the odd semi-final. He's never even been in the final, as far as I can tell. He's never won a GSL ever. And that isn't because, he just bizarrely played worse. It's because when you added in those factors, that's what made other people be able to beat him. Whereas famously, the thing with Tasia supposedly was, if you did just put all the players, so no one knows who's going to play who, and we're all just going to play for 2 days, he just had mad high level where he could just beat anyone in that scenario. So for me, that's the smoking gun. So I won't say Cyril couldn't have done it, but this is where I hate region locking. Like, I think that ruined his hero, unfortunately, because we never got to find out. And then secondly, like, I can get it if you're a Finnish guy, you don't want to move to Korea and live there, because the other part as well that's tough about it is, especially if you're a foreigner, it's not like you could, like, put it this way, if Cyril went now and competed in the next GSL, he might not even qualify. Like, it's so tough to get into the Korean environment, you probably need to commit for like 6 months and say, no matter what happens in the first couple, I won't leave, I'll stay the whole time. Because when NateDOhDoubleG was my friend, he basically told me that's how it works. He said every time I went back to Korea, didn't matter what level I was on in the West, the first few weeks, I would be like, fuck, I'm shit. Like, I'm getting beaten by people where, you know, when I look up the barcode, it's not even like MVP. It's like, you know, like the 8th best player on his team's beating me now. Yeah. And he said what happens is you basically have to just take the beating for like 2 weeks. Then suddenly you start to like get like, you basically, they push you to have your level, high level every time you play. Then it starts to kick in. And when it kicks in, now if you stay for the extra month is when you'll get really good. That's when you'll hit your like peak level. And that's when the few people who did it would start to get, you know, they would get near the top of the Korean ladder. They would start to get into like, they're approaching the round of 8 of GSL. So I would love to see that from Cyril. I'd be so fucking hype if he could do it. But the problem is like, in a world of how WCS operates, and especially in a world where, like you say, people are already giving him the crown, there's not really any reason to do it in that scenario for him, is there?
And I understand the eagerness because he's just the only foreign player that's ever been close to the top Korean level. No one's been anywhere close to where he is. I mean, people say Stefan. I think he has raised the bar for non-Korean StarCraft, but
dude, what makes Stefano a baller is this, right? No one in history, to my knowledge, has ever done this. Stefano, at exactly the time period when Zerg was OP as fuck, and he obviously innovated the whole Brute Lord Infestor start and was a mega player with it. Right. He would even, you can go check this, he would even say in interviews himself, I agree, it is broken. It's actually kind of cheap to win with Brood Lord Infestor, and Zerg is overpowered. Like, what a fucking G this guy was. Because the real reason he did it, by the way, is because the funny thing about Stefano is, individually he'll talk shit to opponents he doesn't like. But as an actual competitor, he's a very fair person, actually. Like, I've even seen him win games as well, mate, and privately go and tell the player, like, yeah, I was a bit lucky in that match, actually. Like, what a fucking G this guy is. What a legend. So I think even he would give it up, mate. He would probably even tell you, actually, I don't think I would have beaten them all if I'd gone to GSL.
Yeah. And that's, again, like, Tejo's kind of that perfect example. He had a really solid, consistent kind of macro game that translated well to those events. And don't get me wrong, Tejo was one of my favorite players ever to watch because he did what he did so well. And if you don't know you're playing him, man, it's hard to beat him because he's just sound fundamentally. But it was obvious that strategically he didn't have the same capacity to play against the other side. He didn't have the same ability. And I don't know if that was just partly a failure of Liquid or if that was just he didn't have that same innovative level of strategic thinking to play it out. But that's kind of, to me, what StarCraft is. That's the heart of what it is. And GSL is built to be that. And so when you see Mario win 4 straight...
That's unreal, isn't it?
I mean...
Because, you know, that's the real problem, isn't it, with the Serral period? Is because, like, he did 3 of those during the time period where Serral was doing it, and then because Serral won WCS, everyone was like, what are you talking about? And I used to tell people, listen, I'm going to have to sound like I hate fucking Serral now because you're so overrating it. It's like, I have to explain to you what a GSL is. Like, the person I really wish we could just bring in here, right, is you just draft in the most obvious example I've ever made. Is like, let's bring in Sue. Right, Sue, explain to us, please, why is a GSL so hard to win? And what do you think of this guy who just won 4 in a row? Tell you what, he'd fucking break that shit down instantly. He'd be like, yeah, it's impossible. You know, when you get to the final, the pressure's insane. Plus, I always think, and here's a counter example that people don't think of. Right. I do think you could make a case that obviously in the last few years, the scene's less competitive because the money's gone out of the scene, people have retired. But that only affects factors like how big the scene is, you know, how much, like, let's say the 10th best player, how much resources does he have? If you're still the top 3 or 4 players, you're all still trying as hard, you're all still trying to win. And so in a different sense, it can also make it harder. Like, for example, if you look at the GSL round of 8s for the last few years, it's like the same 6 players make it every fucking time. So as a result, it's going to be fucking hard when you have to play Innovation every time, or you've got fucking Classic waiting for you, or back in the days when Zest would always be like, these guys, if they play you 5 times, good luck beating that guy the 6th and 7th time. Like these guys are winners, you know. And
you even see it where TY wins more matchups against Maru. Kind of. It's basically the one guy better at TVT than Maru is. And then Maru's the best at the other 2 matchups for Terran. But in the one bracket, I can't remember which run it was, Maru wins it against TY to get the GSL title. And it's just kind of, how did that work out? Where he basically hit the one matchup that doesn't work and still wins. And even you see where last season Maru got banged out in the round of 32. How did that not happen before? Because there's kind of that patience just randomly has a couple strats that work out, and boom, the best of 3's over. That's supposed to happen now and again.
Sure.
And it never did because Maru just was so able to roll with the punches, was so able to strategize and prepare himself for anything that happened and to just kind of innovate to whatever needed to occur. 4 in a row just blows my mind. And even if there had been 4 different winners in that era, maybe you can put Cyril first just because he won kind of the international events. But when there's a guy sitting there in Korea winning, I'd probably say Cyril was 2nd to 4th best in the world or something like that.
Yeah.
Which for a non-Korean is amazing.
That's still amazing. Yeah, of course.
And that's kind of a thing that just frustrates me in all sports at all times. You tell someone, no, I think he's the 2nd best in the world. And they immediately
they lose their shit, of course. Yeah.
It's like when Kevin Durant was on the Warriors and they won 2 times, I say, well, LeBron James is still the better player. And they get really angry with me because I say Kevin Durant is the 2nd best player on earth. It's one of those frustrating things. People just cannot accept 2nd in the world as respect, you know, and I see that a lot in your work. You'll say, you know, let's not overhype X player. Let's not go too far with what we're saying.
Sure.
Kind of like with the Ziwu. Yes, he's just balling out of control right now. He needs to show just a tick more.
Yeah, of course.
On Simple's level. That's not an insult to Ziwu. He's slightly worse than the greatest player in the history of Counter-Strike. And
it's like what people what they aren't getting is it's the other way around. They're the ones that are devaluing players because they want to take a guy, and as soon as a guy gets really good, they want to be like, you're the absolute best already. It's like, whoa. Listen, when we talk about best, first of all, I've watched a lot of best guys, mate. Like, you know, like I know what that class is like. Right. And the whole point is, if you want to be the greatest ever, well, guess what? You got a fucking big checklist to check off here. Like some of these guys, they weren't chopped liver, you know, they were fucking cooking with gas when they were in their prime. Like, let's look at some of the things they did, you know, win X tournaments, be at the top for this long, beat all these different opponents, play well in matches where, you know, it's impossible and you're supposed to lose, and all these factors that, like, the big problem is, if you're a fan, if you ever compare the player to yourself, you're always going to be like amazed. You're going to think, oh, it's incredible. Like there's guys who are like I mean, I'll give you an example. If you go and you look at, maybe take like Ethan from NRG, right? So I don't think NRG's that sick a team. I don't think he's like, he wouldn't even be vaguely in my top 10 players or whatever. But he'll have rounds where he looks fucking insane with his aim. Like he's got very, very good pixel precise aim. So if I watched all of his best highlights, I'd want to be like, oh, but look how good he is, though. Isn't he like, maybe he's like secretly a top 10 player. It's like, no, because what you're undervaluing then is how fucking good the top 10 is in Counter-Strike. You know, there's no joke when you get top 10 players. Like even the 8th guy is going to be seriously fucking insane on a level that probably Ethan isn't. So it's like, basically, a lot of that is just fan culture of like, they're just too tunneled on their player or they don't know what came before them. And so it's a little bit of ignorance. Then again, though, I don't get that bothered because what I learned a long time ago is, in a weird way, that sort of like hype of arguing about that stuff is what actually keeps the scene alive in a way.
Absolutely.
Like you need to have those discussions because like you're saying with the NBA, half of following sports like the NBA is all the million arguments and discussions and all the theories as to why isn't this guy being benched on the team? You know, like that's half the interesting shit. The games themselves are good, but you need that to keep you going between them, I feel like.
Yeah. But what's kind of strange, and you talk about kind of the way that plebs think, is that you see in the NBA, the MVP voting, it's like the journalists are also thinking in the same way. The newest, freshest thing on the block is the one they want to embrace. That's why guys like Michael Jordan, like Kobe, like LeBron, don't win as many MVPs.
Almost every great player, as far as I can tell in the NBA history, has had like awards stolen from them, basically. As far as I can tell.
It's insane. I can't fathom. Or Bill Belichick. I think he's won Coach of the Year once or twice.
Coach of the Year is the worst one because that one's almost entirely narratives, mate. No, the real problem with that as well is, it's like, I'll give you the best example. So this happened in CS, where in CS, almost every single time the SK team won, I would look over, and it didn't matter how crazy first stats were or how much like one game stuck in my mind.
Right.
When I would look at the whole tournament as a whole, I'd be like, I want to give him the MVP award, but how can I not give it to Cold Zero? Like, look at this fucking performance he had here, and look at what he did. And so the big problem is, to someone who's thinking of the hype, it's not the storyline. Cold Zero wins 9th MVP medal. Doesn't sound as cool as Fur wins 3rd, and there's 2 MVPs in this team. That's a way sexier storyline. But the problem is, in my opinion, to be fair to the sport and the history of the sport, you have to take that. How sexy the opinion is can't be a factor. So as a result, if Cold Zero really is the guy who should have the MVP every time, then I have to say to Fur, sorry, mate, like on your team, it's just going to have to be Cold Zero. That's like just the way the game's working at the moment.
Yeah, and that's something I actually appreciated about when they finally started giving simple MVPs when they lost, is that it's a recognition, okay, great, the other team won, but no one was on your level. And that's something I don't understand that much in sports or in esports either, is wanting to say that the best team definitely had the best player.
I feel like that's some insecurity coming through because, you know, like I feel like what happens there is, because to make a case that someone isn't, you start getting into questions of like, you know, well, you can't always just say by default. It's like basically, it's almost like a philosophical debate at that point in time.
Right.
There's no firm ground. Like basically what you have to do is you decide what you think applies and what principles are at work here. And then you say, right, so I'm going to say in this particular case, for example, maybe Ziwu's the MVP of this tournament where he wasn't the actual player carrying the final. Totally legitimate point. But the problem is, to a fan, it's like, I'll give you the analogy. Right. It's the same reason why it doesn't matter how much corruption you find about the government. The normal person in the street will always accept the position of like, maybe it was just one guy who was a bit of a rogue actor and he's been taken care of. He's in prison now. It's all back to normal. And now we can just pretend everything's great. It's because they want it to be real. You know, the idea of the status quo being reasonable is a very comforting thought, isn't it? So it's, similarly, if this team wins the tournament, it's easier for everyone if we can just say, and they also had the best player. It all makes sense, right? The equation makes perfect sense. We don't need to think anymore. We don't need to torture ourselves. Whereas the point is, to me, it isn't torture. I love having those discussions. I love going deep and trying to figure out who was and what was the role that, like, for example, I love trying to figure out as a result, how did the team that didn't have the best player win? That's pretty fucking cool in its own way. Like, there's probably something extra at play there.
And it's kind of what is easy to embrace versus what is the nuanced point. And that's something I've appreciated, just part of following you and probably why I continue to consume so much of your content, is when you add that shading, for me, that makes everything richer and the whole experience better. But it seems like so many people just want these really stark lines of A leads to B leads to C. And it's kind of like when you talked about Zeus and his impact in the Team Liquid Ascendancy. There's more going on than just, we got a Dren and that's why we're the best. Or we picked up Stewie 2K and that's why we're the best. No, everything is built on all the things that happened before it. And I just don't understand why people can't embrace ideas of nuance. For example, with League of Legends, I think that Perks is overrated as an individual player, as an AD carry right now, because his team is so disgustingly strong. People want to make him a top 10 player and a top 2 or 3 AD carry in the LEC. And I go, well, okay, he has probably the best jungler. Well, okay, no, he has the best jungler, he has the best mid laner, he has the best top laner, and among the top 3 supports, I might say, as long as Mickey is healthy, probably the best support. He's allowed to be the 4th best AD carry at that
Won't
point
be the end of
and
the world,
still
right?
be incredible.
Yeah.
But people just have to make him a top 10 player. They might say, well, okay, maybe Upset is a better AD carry
Sure.
and he's second or something like that. I'm going, no, there's some decent depth AD carry in Europe right now. Perks doesn't have to be.
Sure.
And that doesn't make him bad. He's actually playing better than I could have ever anticipated into his role right now. He's switched from mid lane and has played the role well. That's good.
Sure.
So I don't know. It's kind of this idea of assessing things accurately. And to get back to that MVP idea, people want that storyline because they think that makes the most narrative sense. But you really just need to say, no, actually, Device was the best player on Astralis 8 times out of 10 in the finals they went to, and so we have to give it to him 8 times out of 10 or more, because that.
And it has nothing to do with dissing the others either. Like, they could
Yeah.
also have been insanely. It's just the way team dynamics work again. Like the way the team
Right.
works. What are the odds Device wouldn't shine if the whole system's set up? It makes perfect sense. This video was kindly supported by Alexander Rao, NateDOhDoubleG, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Dean Tanglis, Wendelful, Blunt Smoking Anus Destroyer, Daniel Olivar, Chi Mao, JDubs, Kolja G, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, and a special thanks always goes out to Jerky's Minion and weixz. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Perhaps you'd like to ask me a question for my monthly video AMA. Do you want teasers or who the guests are for my upcoming videos? Maybe you want to take part in a monthly donate discussion with me. Well, all of these perks and more are available at the Patreon link in the description box below.